Okay. So we're talking about the strategic offsite for you, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to the strategic offsites that we know so well and have experienced. I know, JL, and I appreciate you had some questions for me because I've done several of these, and I think you also know there's been an evolution. But I would love to go through, and the reason that we're doing this is I thought your questions were so helpful that perhaps others might benefit as well. So do you want to dive in?
Yeah. I like when I spoke to you, and then I spoke to a couple more people after you shared with me, like there's something that I think people that really have this deep understanding of who they are go through it. And this is why it just triggered me to wanting to know more about it. So maybe the first question that I had is like, how did you start with it? What was the, wow, I need to do this, right? What happened to you?
Well, what if we do this? What if we start backwards with the why for listeners? Because I think there can be multiple. And then I'll talk about the evolution of how it happened for me, because I think how it happens for us happens differently. But in terms of the why, I think there are two things. I think one is this key that you've already mentioned of self-awareness. And even that, there was Aegon Zender did this 2021 survey of 1,000 executives. And of the 4 top things that the CEOs said they needed, one of the 4 was self-awareness. And so what I'm excited about is that this is more top of mind across the board. But I think the other part of this that is important for a strategic offsite for yourself, and I think it's why, that Think Differently ad from Apple was so powerful, is we all aspire to be those people, those thinkers on the leading edge, thinking differently, thinking outside the box. But in life, how do we actually do that if we're always on the hamster wheel of life? So somehow getting outside the box of our life, I think, is really, to me, that's the why. So it's self-awareness, and it's deliberately creating a practice around thinking differently. I'll pause there. Did you want to say something?
No. I was just going to say then, how did you manage to not bring the hamster wheel into the offsite? Right? Because that's
very, very hard to do. Very, very hard to do. And I think that maybe we'll get into that when we talk about the structures of this. But I think another part that's of the why that's so important is, we get to a certain point and we know that the way that we've been doing things doesn't really work anymore. So in order to get to that next level, you do need something else. And I think there's something that you and I, JL, have talked about in other conversations around this really just wiser, not harder. So it's not about working harder, but in order to be wiser, there's an element of patience, perspective, and pace. And so I think those three keys, the offsite, from my perspective, deliberately needs to be slower, a slower pace, a different rhythm than the rhythm that we're normally in. It cultivates that patience and the space, not needing to fix or solve right away, but how do I sit in a question, right? And that perspective. So it's deliberately a different place outside of your normal day-to-day so that you can look from the outside in. So I think these are kind of the key ingredients and the why. It's really the self-awareness, but it's to be wiser. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. I love the 3 Ps. You make it simple: pace, patience, and is it perseverance? Perspective.
Oh, perseverance for sure. And that will come in here too, but
So can you describe like maybe like how the offsite works? Like
Yeah.
very, I'm a very pragmatic
Yep.
person, like number of days that work for you and how do you
So,
create content?
so and this is maybe, I'll talk a little about the evolution. For me, I stumbled into it. And I think like many things, we each have our own ways of getting there. So I don't know that there's any one right way to do this. For me, in when I was looking for how to up level my life, I did a 5-day sesshin, which is an intensive meditative practice. I went away. I went to Chozenji, which is a Rinzai Zen temple and martial arts dojo in Hawaii. In that concentrated 5 days, there was no talking. It was intense. It's like if you're going to put yourself on a kettle and raise the heat up really high, there's nowhere to go but in. And so for some that need, something intense, I think going to a structured place where there is a level of the built-in structure. You don't have phones. There is no cheating. There's no, so that type of thing in terms of setup could be a good way to start. If that's not necessarily what you need, and there are ways I think you can create it. Like for me, after that, it wasn't practical to go flying to Hawaii every time I needed to. And I wanted to make it something I could do more easily. So a friend, my friend Catherine, told me about a place in the Bay Area in California that had cabins and they provided meals, but it was all about the cabins so that you could do your own. And it was it didn't matter what faith background, it wasn't necessarily about a religious practice, but doing your inner growth. So that was the next step in the evolution for me of, okay, I'm going away, I'm going to a place, has this structure. The phones were off. I'm struggling with trying to be quiet. and it's confronting. So there's an element of this. So then in the next stage in the evolution, I didn't necessarily, and also both because we had fires in California, the place I went to was shut down. We also had COVID, other, interesting challenges. So I just looked for places I could go to for 3 days. And this is part of, I think, in terms of that practical structure, I think having at least 3 days, it's like you're barely getting there. Everything helps, but I think there's an element of reaching a point where you're actually getting some momentum within yourself and you're moving beyond the initial, okay, what the heck am I doing here kind of thing.
And do you stay by yourself, completely by yourself on those 3 days? This was 3 days, you go in and you cook and you meditate, and tell me a little bit about how the day goes.
So I think the setup's important. Yes, by myself. I tell people, the people nearest and dearest to me, this is what I'm doing. So if you're messaging me, I'm not going to be responding, or there may be one person that I might text in that time when I'm away, just so that there's a line or there's a thread or there's some form of communication. So I'm not like totally off, but limiting it, really deliberately saying, okay, this is not checking emails all day. In fact, that's so setting up the structures in advance, I think, is key. And there's really a range. For me, it's been easier if I don't have to figure out meals or going out to a restaurant, where I just go to the place and I don't leave the place necessarily. I might go for a walk. And I think having a mixture of whether it's meditation time or, exercises or ways to move your body is really important. But needing to orchestrate a lot of other things can be distracting. So trying to set things up so it minimizes that. So I've brought food. So in that place that I went to, they provided meals, which was wonderful. So if that can be part of the setup, that's helpful. If not, I've I've brought in food, like whether it's soups or this or that, and just tried to keep it pretty simple.
Mm. What is the hardest thing you encountered when you're doing those things? Is it not going to your phone, or is, or is the being unsettled? Can you share?
It depends. It depends on where I'm at in my life there, and each of these things helps increase the awareness. At times I might struggle with boundaries and saying no, and feeling like I need to be responding to everyone else rather than taking the time. So be it. So in some cases, that's part of the lesson. Other times I may just get there and I'm exhausted. And then I realize, whoa, I'm just completely wiped out, and feeling like I need to come away with something when really maybe I just need to sleep for like a day. So you really don't know. And that's the interesting thing here. I feel is if you go in expecting to get something, it can be counterproductive to the process. It's really more about bearing witness to yourself and what you're struggling with, is really the point.
And then how can you share, like, how do you capture what, like, the insights or some of the, and then how do you follow through?
So in terms of, I love to bring a journal. I mean, I have a writing practice, so I highly recommend that. Even if you don't have a writing practice, to journal and record and write. I also love having just blank paper, and it could be a couple colored pens, so I can scribble, draw ideas, thoughts. So I would say a lot depends on where you're at and what you want. So if you're going into this saying, okay, I want to be more just thoughtful, like asking myself, what are my values, and is my life aligning with my values? I might go in then with questions or prompts around values. If I'm going in, as I have many times as an entrepreneur or someone driving a business, I might go in with a particular business challenge and questions around that. If I'm going in just for my own spiritual growth, I might go in just with a book from a spiritual teacher that I admire, I'm curious about, and actually take the time, and so that the only thing I'm consuming is actually their words or their work. So it really depends on where you're at and what your purpose is, and then creating the structures. And I think coming in with just a couple questions, not tons, but a few, so that way you're sitting with the questions.
And then can you share some of the benefits that you were able to have as
So it's interesting. So part of it is the benefits, yes, but sometimes the difficulty and the struggle of it. So, and I see this deliberately because sometimes it can feel like you're not getting anywhere or not getting benefits, and that's actually a good sign. So not to get too hung up on benefits, especially in the beginning, and that if you're struggling, that's actually progress, if that makes sense. And just to notice
can
that.
you share more about this? Yeah, can you share more about why this is important?
So
I get it, but I already feeling like my heart,
yeah, it's
like
uncomfortable, right? Why would
going up.
you? So it can range. It's almost like, oh, it's quiet, and I don't want to be quiet. I want to go do something, or I want to eat something. It's part of it can just be noticing, oh, I'm struggling just to be quiet. I mean, it's in many cases why just sitting still for meditation is so hard. We want to go do something, and so just to force, so it's watching, okay, now I want to eat, or now I want to talk to someone, now I want to do. Okay, great. These are part of the patterns of the way that you normally cope with life. Tracking that, like you're tracking an animal. Watch, oh, this is what's happening. This is what I'm doing. That is what self-awareness is all about. So it's not always comfortable. It can be frustrating. And that's okay. Just it's about witnessing, not fixing it.
But you probably notice some change in you for
Yes.
doing this because you keep going.
Yes.
Can you share what that?
Yes. So eventually, I'm being deliberate here, right? In terms of have a low bar. That's the point. Don't go in expecting a lot. Over time, you do get benefits. Like even just being quiet. For me, my sensitivity increased. I could tell the difference in a room when I walk in a room. Oh, the mood has shifted. Oh, this just shifted. So it increases that sensitivity, the empathy. It can increase compassion. It can help slow down the pace. For me, oh my gosh, road rage. Like it could help me be more patient even with drivers on the road. So a whole range of things can start to change. But again, I just caution not to go expecting that from one strategic offsite. But over time, this sensitivity grows and you can become more comfortable in space and silence and able to create space for others.
So you said about no expectations or low expectations. Is there any other shortfalls that you could share?
There are, so, and I think you've heard me loud and clear. I really wanted to emphasize that not to expect a lot. That it's that whatever you get is something. So, and I think maybe this goes back to your practical question, that I would probably include either during or at the end of this time that you take. The question is, what did I learn about myself? Something's pleasant, something's not. And what's one thing that I'll do differently? What's one new action I might take? And to me, the question is, if you learn one thing about yourself that you didn't know before, you didn't fully see, and if it propels you to take one new action, is it worth it? And if you get more than one thing, which you probably will, wow, like phenomenal.
I love this. And how many times a year do you do that in average?
I these days I do it about once a quarter.
Okay.
So once a quarter or at least twice a year.
Okay.
But for some that could be too much. So even if you just do it once and do it, take 3 days, I think the real point is see what happens for you, and then even in terms of the next steps, see what you want to do next or do with it. Or, do I need to increase the intensity or not? Or do I need to have more structure or not? So these are all, I think, part of that, the self-authoring piece that as coaches we talk about a lot in vertical development. But yeah,
it's a true exercise of letting go, right? Because it's like not only an offsite with yourself, but it's like you're meeting you and then really fighting distraction. So I really applaud you for this. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't spoken about?
I think just that from where I sit, this internal work is the work, because so much of the world is outside in, and even our structures in corporate spheres is getting feedback, which is very important from others, but that's all external. And so this is something that's deliberately increasing the volume on your internal awareness, so that you're strengthening your relationship with yourself. And so I really can't recommend it highly enough. I mean, I think it's
Oh yeah, you inspired me, Rebecca, to do
hopefully I
it.
didn't
And
scare you.
yeah, well, I have to say, I think I'm worried on day three. I'm gonna go completely crazy, grab the car and run. But it's very, you know, it is an exercise of, there's something about trust that I keep bouncing in my head as I hear, like, trusting that, you know, I can do it. I like is taking that step because I feel the urge, right, of doing this, and so many excuses on the day to day. Oh, because of this or because of that, it's not the right time, and blah blah blah. There's this and that, and there's like a self-compassion or generosity to your towards yourself, which I think it's really beautiful. So thank you.
You're welcome, JL. I so appreciate your questions and your intent. Yeah. So I'm looking
No,
forward
it's
to hearing how it goes.
yes. I'll definitely. I'll probably send you like an SOS. Shit, this didn't work for me. Like,